Tonight, on Lurking Moon, we breach the classified airspace where logic fails and the unexplained takes flight. 5 harrowing paranormal stories of military airmen who encountered the impossible at 30,000 feet.
There was another jet on my wing in the Nevada test and training range, and nobody on the ground could explain where it came from. I was 40 minutes into a solo, dissimilar air combat training sortie, running through a series of offensive and defensive BFM sets against a simulated adversary profile loaded into the mission computer. The NTTR is vast, over 2 million acres of restricted airspace, and on that particular Tuesday morning, I had a block of sky essentially to myself. My flight lead had scrubbed 30 minutes before takeoff due to a hydraulic snag. Operations cleared me to fly the profile alone. Single ship, no wingman assigned. That was confirmed twice on the radio before I taxied. I picked up the first profile at 22,000 feet, pushed the throttle into afterburner, and worked through the engagement. Standard stuff. My situational awareness was good, my energy management was where it needed to be, and I was feeling sharp. I rolled into a high-aspect conversion and set up for a simulated gun employment. That's when the second jet appeared. It came up on my left wing in a combat spread, close enough that I could read the tail markings if I focused. My first thought was that someone had launched late and joined without calling on frequency. It happens. I keyed up again and asked for identification on every frequency I had. Nothing. Dead air. I glanced over again. The jet was an F-16, same block as mine, painted in a standard gray scheme. But something about the tail number bothered me. I couldn't place the unit. The markings weren't current Nellis inventory, and the squadron patch on the fuselage, I caught it briefly when the sun caught the aircraft at the right angle, wasn't one I recognized from the current NTTR tenant units. I told myself it was probably a transient who had wandered into my working area. Irritating, but not unheard of. I keyed up again and asked for identification on every frequency I had. Nothing. Then I made my mistake. I was setting up for a high G rolling scissors, a maneuver I'd run dozens of times, when I misjudged my entry altitude. The ground in that part of the range has ridgelines that don't always read correctly on the altimeter during aggressive maneuvering. I was late recognizing the geometry, and I was committed. A fraction of a second later, my radio crackled, not from a tower transmission, not from a range controller, but from a calm, unhurried voice on my tactical frequency. Viper 2, terrain, roll wings level, pull. I pulled, hard. The jet groaned through the recovery, and I cleared the ridge with margin I wouldn't want to measure. My hands were shaking when I leveled off. I scanned left. The wingman was still there, steady as a shelf, completely unbothered. He held position through my climb back to altitude, and then, somewhere around 24,000 feet, during a gentle left turn, he was gone. No rejoin, no breakaway call, no departure turn. Just gone from my 6 o'clock scan, my radar scope, and my mirrors simultaneously. I declared a knock it off and returned to Nellis. The debrief was uncomfortable. The range controllers confirmed no other aircraft were working my block of airspace during that window. Transient aircraft were checked. Nothing matched the timeline. Radar returns from the range tracking system showed 1 aircraft throughout the entire sortie. Mine. The maintenance crew downloaded my helmet camera footage for a routine post-flight review. I wasn't in the room when they watched it, but the senior crew chief came and found me in the squadron building afterwards. He didn't say much. He just pulled up a still frame on his tablet and showed it to me. The image was taken during my recovery pull, the moment I broke away from the terrain. You could see the canopy bow reflected in the HUD class, and in that reflection, distorted, partially obscured, but unmistakably present, was the silhouette of another jet tucked into close formation off my left wing. The crew chief zoomed in on the tail number. We both looked at it for a long time. It belonged to an F-16 from a unit that had been deactivated in 1997, the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing, formerly based at Nellis, stood down more than 20 years before I ever flew a single sortie over that range. The footage is still in the maintenance archive. I asked about it 6 months later after I'd transferred to a new assignment. The file hadn't been deleted. It also hadn't been annotated, reviewed for disposition, or forwarded to safety. It was just sitting there in the system, tagged with my tail number and my date of flight, waiting for someone to decide what to do with it.
We were 50 miles off the Normandy coast when the formation appeared out of the clouds, and nothing on our radar showed a single return. I was flying a C-130J on a commemorative support mission for a D-Day anniversary observance, ferrying a small delegation of military historians and a French liaison officer from RAF Mildenhall to Caen Carpiquet Airport. The date was June 6th. The weather over the channel was overcast but manageable. A solid gray ceiling sitting around 8,000 feet, light turbulence, visibility decent below the layer. We had French civilian ATC on frequency and were in routine contact. Nothing unusual about the flight up to that point. My loadmaster, Staff Sergeant Anita Crown, had been moving around the cargo compartment for most of the transit, keeping the passengers settled. My co-pilot, Captain Derek Marsh, was handling comms while I flew. About 40 minutes out from Caen, Marsh pointed forward and slightly left without saying anything. I looked up from the instruments. They were there, maybe 1,000 feet above us and 2 miles ahead, flying in the same general direction we were tracking, northeast to southwest, parallel to the coastline. A formation of propeller-driven aircraft, large, twin-engined. The silhouettes were unmistakable even through the haze. High wings, rounded noses, tail configurations I recognized from old recognition charts. C-47s, at least 9 of them, possibly more, arranged in a loose but disciplined 3-element formation. The kind of formation spacing you'd see in historical footage from airborne operations. Marsh said quietly, "You seeing what I'm seeing?" It wasn't a question. I called Paris Control and asked if they had any traffic on our left side, altitude approximately 9,000 feet, heading southwest. The controller came back after a short pause and said no traffic in that sector. Radar was clean. I gave him the position again and asked him to recheck. He rechecked. Still nothing. I watched the formation for close to 4 minutes. They held their spacing with a precision that was almost mechanical. No drift, no wandering, no radio calls on any frequency I could monitor. I ran through guard and several VHF frequencies out of reflex. Nothing. The aircraft themselves were gray, slightly indistinct against the cloud layer above them, but structurally coherent. They weren't a reflection, weren't a lens artifact. Marsh saw them. I saw them. We both tracked them until they entered a denser section of cloud and disappeared. What I didn't know until we landed was that Crown had seen them too. She had come forward to check on a passenger about 2 minutes after the formation appeared, glanced out the cockpit side window, and taken a photograph on her personal phone before I was even aware she was standing there. She didn't say anything during the flight. She showed it to me on the ramp at Cannes after the passengers had deplaned, without any prompting from me. The image was taken through the cockpit glass at an angle, slightly smeared from the window surface, but the formation was there. 9 aircraft in a clear V of V's arrangement, captured against the gray cloud layer. The shapes were consistent with C-47 sky trains. The image metadata confirmed the timestamp. It matched our position log over the channel within 90 seconds. The French liaison officer, a Colonel Bertrand, had also been in the forward cabin at that moment. When I described what we'd seen, he didn't seem surprised. He told me, in careful English, that there had been similar reports from pilots transiting that corridor on June 6th over the years. Not every year, not reliably, but the accounts existed, and they were consistent enough that a few French aviation historians had collected them informally. I filed a standard traffic observation with base operations at Mildenhall upon return, listing the sighting as unidentified aircraft, no radar confirmation, no radio contact, no transponder returns. The report was received and acknowledged. A follow-up request went to both French Civil ATC and UK NATS, asking for radar archive review of that corridor during our transit window. Both organizations confirmed no returns in the area during the relevant time frame. Crown's photograph was reviewed by the base intelligence officer for a courtesy. His written assessment noted the image showed aircraft-shaped silhouettes consistent with World War II-era twin-engine transport aircraft, and that the formation geometry was consistent with standard airborne assault doctrine of that period. He listed the origin of the image as unexplained and recommended no further action. The photograph is still on Crown's phone. She hasn't deleted it. I asked her once why not, and she thought about it for a moment before answering. Because somebody should remember they were there. Paris Control's radar archive for that day has been pulled and reviewed twice since we submitted our report. Both reviews confirmed a clean scope over that sector during our transit. No returns, no anomalies, no ghosts in the data. Just the channel, just the clouds, just the coast of Normandy, 80 feet below the overcast, the same water and beach and cliff line that absorbed more violence in a single morning than most people can hold in their minds at once. And 9 aircraft in perfect formation, flying southwest, heading to an appointment nobody on the ground could track. The report sits in the Mildenhall Operations Archive, open, unresolved, filed under the date, which tells you everything it needs to tell you.
The object was stationary over the Indian Ocean, large enough that it blocked stars, and our cockpit clocks stopped the moment we turned toward it. I was the patrol commander on a P-8A out of Diego Garcia, running a standard maritime surveillance track northwest of the atoll on a clear night with exceptional visibility. No moon, which meant the sky was dense with stars from horizon to horizon, the kind of sky you only get over open ocean far from any city. My co-pilot was Lieutenant J.G. Carroll Fenn, solid and methodical, the kind of pilot who cross-checks everything twice without being asked. We had a full crew in the back, running sensors and communications. 4 hours into a 7-hour sortie, nothing unusual on any system. Fen saw it first. She didn't say anything immediately. I noticed her looking left and slightly forward, head tilted, the way you look when something doesn't fit the pattern your brain expects. Then she said, "Knox, what is that?" I looked left. The object was at roughly our altitude, maybe 2 miles out, and it was enormous. Triangular in shape, that was clear even at distance, the geometry too regular and too large to mistake for anything natural. 3 vertices, flat underside, no visible fuselage depth from our angle. It was dark against the dark sky, which is why the way I could see it most clearly was by what it covered. The star field behind it was simply gone. A perfect triangular absence in the sky where stars should have been. I went to the radar immediately. The return was solid and stationary. No movement, no altitude change, no drift. It sat there on the scope like a fixed ground feature at altitude. I ran the IFF interrogation. No response on any mode. I tried guard frequency and 2 other channels. Nothing. I called back to the sensor station and told Senior Chief Petty Officer Wallace to get eyes on the contact to port and run everything he had on it. He came back 30 seconds later and said his passive IR was showing no heat output, no engine emissions, no friction signature, no thermal bloom of any kind. A solid radar return with 0 thermal presence. The same combination Tech Sergeant Bell had documented over the Gulf. Cold to every sensor that should have read it as hot. I turned the aircraft toward it for a closer look. Standard procedure when you have an unidentified contact at close range. You maneuver for identification before you decide anything else. As we closed the distance, the star field effect became more pronounced. The triangular void in the sky grew as we approached, the edges sharp and clean, no atmospheric blurring. Whatever the object was made of, it wasn't translucent and it wasn't reflective. It absorbed everything behind it without giving anything back. We closed to approximately 3/4 of a mile before Fen said, "Knox, my clock." I looked at the instrument panel. The digital mission clock had stopped. So had the chronometer. I checked my wrist. My flight watch, a mechanical piece I'd owned for 6 years, had stopped as well. I called back to Wallace and asked him to check the time displays on his console. He confirmed his were stopped too, all of them reading the same frozen time, a figure that corresponded to approximately when we'd begun our turn toward the object. We held our position for what felt like 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then the object moved. Not away, up, vertically, without any transitional acceleration phase, without any visible propulsion effect. No exhaust, no vapor, no light. The triangular shape simply rose, the void in the star field shifting upward until it cleared the visible sky and was gone. The stars returned immediately and completely, as if nothing had ever interrupted them. My clock restarted. Fen's restarted. Wallace confirmed the same from the back. When I checked the mission elapsed time against the last confirmed timestamp before the event, there was a 3-minute gap. The flight recorder gap was examined by the avionics team for 2 days. Their conclusion was that no known technical failure mode could account for a clean 3-minute absence in recorded data without corresponding system error flags. The recorder showed no errors. It had simply not recorded. The incident report was forwarded through naval intelligence channels. A follow-up request was submitted asking whether any satellite or ground-based sensor had coverage of that corridor during our transit window. The response came back 3 weeks later. The request had been received and was under review. That response has not been updated since. Fen keeps a copy of the radar screenshot on her personal drive. The triangular return is clearly visible, centered on the scope, with the timestamp frozen at the moment we began our turn. She's shown it to 2 people outside the crew, both of whom had no explanation. The Indian Ocean is very large and very dark at night. There is a great deal of it that nobody watches closely. Whatever we saw out there that night knows that too.
The shadow appeared on the right side of my helicopter, somewhere over the Sierra Nevada, and it stayed there for 41 minutes without any object in the sky to cast it. I was flying a UH-60 Blackhawk on a night medevac out of Army Aviation Support Facility, Fresno, responding to a trauma call from a search and rescue handoff in the high country east of the city. The patient was a civilian hiker, male, late 30s, with a head injury and suspected spinal involvement from a fall at elevation. The Sierra Nevada at night in autumn is a specific kind of difficult terrain that rises and drops without warning, rotor turbulence off the ridgelines, and temperatures cold enough to affect aircraft performance at the altitudes required to clear the passes. I had flown that corridor enough times to be comfortable with it, not relaxed, comfortable. There's a difference. My crew that night was Flight Medic Sergeant Dana Farrell in the back with the patient, and my co-pilot, CW2 Aaron Gish, in the right seat. We had picked up the patient from a ground team on a ridgeline LZ at roughly 9,000 feet and were in the transit phase, heading west and descending toward the valley floor and Fresno's trauma center. About 12 minutes into the transit, Gish said, "Brooks, what's on our right side?" I looked right. The shadow was on the lower fuselage and extending past the tail boom, a large, dark shape moving with the aircraft, but with a form that didn't match any part of the helicopter's own silhouette. We were flying under a quarter moon with some high cloud, enough ambient light to cast faint shadows from the rotor disc on overcast below us, but we were above the cloud layer at that point. The shadow was not cast downward onto anything. It was lateral, attached to the right side of the aircraft, moving with it, as if something large were flying in close formation off our right flank, and its shadow was somehow projecting onto the fuselage itself. The shape was irregular, wide at the forward section, tapering rearward, with what I can only describe as a scalloped upper edge, not smooth, not mechanical, organic in outline. It reminded me of images I'd seen of large birds in soaring flight, the wing geometry when the feathers separate at the tips, but scaled far beyond any bird I knew of and pressed against the side of a moving helicopter rather than cast on any surface below. I did the immediate practical checks. I looked for any aircraft in our vicinity that could account for a projected shadow. Nothing visible, nothing on frequency, nothing on the TCAS. I looked at the rotor disc and our own structural geometry from my seat to rule out a self-shadow artifact from the angle of the moon. The moon was behind us and left. The shadow was on our right. The geometry didn't work for any natural explanation I could construct. Gish had his flashlight out and was pointing it toward the right fuselage from his seat, which illuminated nothing except the aircraft's own skin. The shadow remained visible without the flashlight and disappeared in the wash of the beam. When he switched it off, the shadow returned. I called back to Farrell on the interphone and asked for her status without mentioning what we were seeing. She reported the patient stable, vitals holding, no issues in the back. I told her to keep her focus on the patient and said nothing else. The shadow rode the right side of the aircraft for the remainder of the mountain transit, 41 minutes from when Gish first called it out to when we descended below 3,000 feet on the valley approach. As we dropped altitude and the terrain flattened beneath us, the shadow diminished. Not suddenly, it faded, the outline softening and then dissolving over the course of about 2 minutes as we made the transition from mountain corridor to valley floor. By the time we were on final approach to the trauma center helipad, the right fuselage was clean. We landed, transferred the patient, and I held the debrief until Farrell was clear of the aircraft. Then I told both her and Gish what I wanted documented and what I wanted left out of the official mission report. The flight itself had been executed correctly. The patient had been delivered, and filing a report about an unidentified shadow on the fuselage serves no one's interests in a clean-cut medevac narrative. Gish agreed. Farrell agreed too, though she was quieter about it. 3 days later, Farrell came to find me. She had been contacted by the trauma nursing staff as part of a routine follow-up on the patient's recovery. He was alert, communicative, progressing well. During a conversation with one of the floor nurses, he had described his memory of the medevac flight, fragmented, as head injury patients' memories often are, but present. He remembered the noise of the helicopter and the sensation of movement. He remembered the cold. And he told the nurse that during the flight he had seen something through the window beside him, something large and dark, outside the aircraft, moving with it. He described it in the nurse's notes as something black holding the helicopter. His words, not a paraphrase. Something black holding the helicopter, like it was making sure we got there. The nurse noted it in the patient's chart note as a possible hallucination secondary to the head injury and medication. Standard documentation. Farrell got a copy of the chart note and brought it to me without comment. I've kept it in my flight records since then, not in any official file, not attached to the mission report, just in a folder I keep with other documents from flights that don't fit cleanly into any category the Army provides. The patient recovered fully. The mission is logged as successful and unremarkable. The chart note is still in that folder. The patient's words are still in it, written in a nurse's handwriting on a standard clinical form. Something black holding the helicopter. I don't know what was on our right side that night. I know it stayed with us until we were out of the mountains. I know it left before we landed. And I know a man with a head injury and no knowledge of what his pilots had seen described it from a window in the back of the aircraft, in the dark, without any way to have known we were looking at the same thing.
The hangar doors opened at midnight the same way they had opened every night that week. And this time, I was standing close enough to hear the crew inside. I'd been assigned to Lakenheath for 14 months when the Hangar 7 situation became my problem. The hangar sat at the eastern edge of the maintenance complex, separated from the active bays by a taxiway that hadn't seen regular use since a runway reconfiguration in the 1990s. The structure itself was older than that, a Cold War-era facility that had been decommissioned following a ground accident in 1987 involving an F-111 crew during pre-departure checks. 3 men. The aircraft never left the hangar. The official record listed the cause as a fuel systems failure during engine run-up.
The hangar was closed after the investigation and had remained administratively sealed ever since, used occasionally for inert equipment storage, but never returned to active maintenance rotation. My involvement started because of a perimeter security flag. The base security system had logged the hangar's primary access doors opening on 4 consecutive nights between 23:30 and 01:15. Each time, a security patrol responded and found the doors closed and locked, the interior undisturbed, no evidence of entry. The system logs showed the doors opening. The physical check showed them shut. The security officer asked me, as the senior maintenance NCO on night shift, to conduct a physical inspection of the door mechanism and determine if a malfunction was generating false open signals. I scheduled the inspection for the 5th night, intending to be present when the system triggered. I brought Senior Airman Tara Okonkwo with me as a second set of eyes. We arrived at Hangar 7 at 2300. Flashlights, tool bag, clipboard. The building was dark and cold, the Suffolk wind moving around the structure with the particular sound that large, empty hangars make at night, a low, resonant vibration in the steel frame. We checked the door mechanism on the exterior. No obvious fault. The hydraulic actuator was old but intact. I noted the mechanism for the log, and we stepped back to wait. At 23:47, we heard the first sound. It came from inside the hangar. A metallic knock, followed by another, spaced like tool contacts on a surface, the rhythm of someone working a panel or running a check. Deliberate, unhurried, the sound of a maintenance crew working by rote. Okonkwo looked at me. I held up a hand and listened. More sounds followed, the specific clank of a cowling being repositioned, a low voice, not quite audible as words, the kind of murmur you hear when someone is reading a checklist aloud to themselves. Then a second voice responding, equally indistinct but clearly present. A brief pause, then what sounded like a hand tool being set down on a concrete floor. I checked my watch, 23:51. At 23:59, the doors opened. Not violently, not with any mechanical distress, they separated smoothly, the way properly functioning hangar doors operate when someone activates the control from inside. A gap appeared between the 2 main panels, moving slowly until both doors had moved to their full open position. The interior of the hangar was dark. No lighting was active. The sounds had stopped. I stepped inside with my flashlight. The hangar held 2 inert equipment pallets and a decommissioned ground power unit along the far wall, nothing that had changed since the last inventory. The floor was dusty in the uniform way of a space that sees no regular traffic. No footprints other than the ones Okonkwo and I were making. No tools, no equipment out of place, no sign that anyone had been present. Then Okonkwo called me from the left side of the hangar, near an old workbench that ran along the interior wall. She was holding a clipboard. It was a standard Air Force maintenance pre-flight checklist form, the older version with the carbon copy backing that hadn't been in regular use since the early 1990s. The form was filled out in handwriting. Multiple hands, different pens, the kind of document that gets passed between crew members during a walk-around. Every line was completed. Systems checks, fuel state, control surface verification, engine run-up readiness, all of it initialed and signed at the bottom. The date at the top of the form was March 14th, 1987. I read the signatures at the bottom 3 times before I accepted what I was seeing. 3 names, signed in ink that looked as fresh as if the form had been filled out that evening. I recognized none of them immediately.
Okonkwo photographed the form with her phone before either of us touched it. I bagged it and logged it as found property. The next morning, I ran the names through the base historical records with help from the wing historian. All 3 signatures matched the crew members who had died in the 1987 accident. The handwriting on the form is consistent with signatures in file in the Accident Investigation Archive, which the historian located within 2 hours of my request. The security office reviewed the door logs for the 5th night. The system had recorded the doors opening at 23:59, consistent with what Okonkwo and I witnessed. It also showed a secondary log entry, an interior panel activation, the kind generated when someone uses the inside control to operate the doors. There was no one inside the hangar. The pre-flight checklist is in the wing's safety office, sealed in an evidence bag. The historian submitted a written statement noting the handwriting matches. The security log anomaly is documented in the base systems record. Hangar 7 was re-inspected and the door mechanism was replaced. The security flags have not recurred since the mechanism was changed. But the checklist is still in the safety office, still dated March 14, 1987, still signed, and every item on the checklist is marked complete, right down to the engine run-up clearance for a flight that never happened.
We appreciate you tuning in to Lurking Moon Radio. If these tales hit home, smash that like button and subscribe, and help us keep hunting for what's lurking in the shadows. Till the next one, keep searching for the unknown.